He's a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA. He is the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center. He is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. He's the executive director of the MindSight Institute. And he's an author. He's a prolific author. On top of all of that, he's written many, many books. And undoubtedly, many of you here have read his books. And of course, we have an opportunity in a little bit to spend time and to maybe learn some more about him. And the books that he's written, they've been translated into more than 40 languages. He has as many as 3 bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. And I would imagine, knowing how prolific you are, that even as we're here now in the back of your mind, in an undistracted form, it is busily working on the next one. They include Aware, the book that he's here to talk a little bit about, and that we'll have a signing about outside. The Developing Mind was one of his first books and really broke new ground, a field coming out of it called interpersonal neurobiology. The founder of a field, interpersonal neurobiology. And for those of us interested in mindfulness, intrapersonal neurobiology, knowing ourselves as well as getting to know and understand and connect and attune to each other. He's also, this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's somewhat serious. In Aware, the book that he'll talk about, he developed a wonderful exercise known as the Wheel of Awareness. And so in many ways, he's invented the wheel of awareness. You know, it's interesting. To try to introduce somebody who I personally, as many of you have already shared with him, been touched and inspired and informed through his work, it's challenging to say there's this accolade and there's this award and there's this and this and this is sort of a sense of who he is. I mean, it is a sense of who he is, but it's really at the surface. And everything that he has put together and shared and continues to share has a depth, has a depth, has a depth. I'm reminded of the Tao Te Ching. You may be familiar with this wonderful treatment of Taoist wisdom. And it begins, the Tao that can be talked about is not the eternal Tao. And in many ways, the Dan that can be talked about is not the eternal Dan. Because as with wisdom and compassion and the way it's shared with us, it's the direct experiencing of that, which is where it touches us and moves us and has an eternal quality. So Dan Siegel lives in Los Angeles, travels around the world, has truly visited with kings and popes and Dalai Lamas. And he's here in Miami for the first time to be with us. Please join me in welcoming Dan Siegel.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Scott for that wildly overstated statement. Thank you. It's great to be with your friends, and Amishi, thank you. And it's great to be here at the start of a center, which is really something that's so worthy of being supported. Let me just check with our Facebook person. Is it better if I'm up? Actually, for you guys, is it better if I'm up here? Yes. Okay, it's not to be above you, but so I can actually be with you. It's hard. Is it better? Yes. Okay. So what we're going to do today is talk about the idea, when you think about UMindfulness as a center, is the notion of how do you actually bring individuals together as a community so that the relationships of collaboration and connection can support things like compassion, empathy, and insight, so that people actually, instead of being isolated with an experience of a separate self that is so common in our culture, can actually find a home. And the idea of a center that would be both a place for learning as well as outreach beyond just the university walls out into the community, that would also be an academic center. And just to say a little bit about what Scott and Amishi are doing, to bring this, for example, to law school is a huge, huge endeavor, an extremely important thing that helps create the fabric of our legal system. And then for Amishi, in case you don't know, she is one of the world's leading researchers on mindfulness and the brain. And so I'm so honored to be here with you and your center. And really, when you think about what you have here in Miami at the university, you have this incredible opportunity to make academic contributions and to make community contributions at the same time. So what I'm going to do is hopefully offer you some ideas that will be interesting and hopefully even useful. When we go through this, for some of you, how many of you have a regular reflective practice? You might call it a mindfulness practice, just so we see. Raise your hand really, really high. So it's like about, what does it look like, about half people. How many people have never tried a reflective meditative practice before? A few people, okay. And how many people are not really that familiar with what the term mindfulness means, where it's new to you? Okay, not that many. Okay, well, you're at a mindfulness center, so that would make sense. So what I'm going to do then is push the boundaries of what we usually think of as mindfulness into, I think, what is a scientifically consistent perspective, but it may be different from what you've heard about before. So the term mindfulness, while it doesn't have a fixed definition that is agreed upon by all people who deal with it, you probably have a feeling for it that has something to do with being here in the present moment, aware of what's going on, with a certain quality to it. And that quality has the feeling of kindness and compassion and care. So the idea that you could develop mindfulness, let's say, in students, or mindfulness in lawyers or physicians, or mindfulness even in soldiers, is the idea that you can come to life with this different way of being in the world, this different way of not only paying attention, but having this, bless you, having this presence of mind that has these qualities of kindness. Okay, so for me, the word mindfulness really meant being conscientious, and back about, God, now it's about 14 years ago, I actually didn't know much about this whole field of mindfulness until kind of by accident in a parenting book I wrote, Parents Should Be Mindful. And my co-author, Mary Hartzell, she and I wanted a word that just meant be awake and caring and intentional in what you do. And parents taking our workshop and reading our books would say, when are you going to teach us to meditate? And neither Mary nor I meditated. And in those days, meditation was thought of as a really strange thing to do. Even though, like Scott, my wife is a lawyer, she'd been meditating for about 30 years at that point. I just thought it was one of those weird things your spouse does, you just kind of ignore it. She's off in the corner doing this thing, I said, whatever. And I was already thought of as a pariah in the university because I was saying the mind was not just the same as the brain, and oh, did that get people agitated? So I didn't want more agitation, so I said, why are you saying meditation? Like it's like an attack. And they said, because mindfulness is a form of meditation. I said, what kind of meditation is that? And they said, mindfulness meditation. And then I got a phone call like a few days later saying, you're going to be on a panel with this guy named John Kabat-Zinn. And I said, well, who is he? And they said, oh, well, he does this mindfulness thing. And I go, oh my God, this mindfulness thing, what's going on? So around the same time, I was working with a poet named John O'Donohue, who sadly passed away. You guys know John O'Donohue? And John Kabat-Zinn and John O'Donohue and our friend Diane Ackerman and I actually did this whole thing together after this meeting with John at Kabat-Zinn, the meeting. And with John O'Donohue, we were exploring the overlap of science and spirituality. Before I ever knew there was a field called mindfulness. And so when John O'Donohue and I met John Kabat-Zinn, it was this love fest, trying to put together like spirituality, mindfulness. I'm an attachment researcher, where I study parent-child relationships, and we were trying to put all this together in a poetic way with Diane Ackerman. And I say all that because what, for me, mindfulness was a way of developing an internal relationship that very much paralleled the relational connection a parent has with a child when there is a secure attachment. And one of the inspirations for that was that the outcome measures for my field, attachment, when a parent is able to be present for a child and be conscientious and caring and intentional, our outcome measures 30 years later were identical to the outcome measures for mindfulness-based stress reduction from John Kabat-Zinn. Can you bring that up here and we'll have a conversation with them and see if they want to be mindful with us? Oh, it's a reminder to meditate. Very good. It's like having an app that says it's now time to turn your phone off. So the idea of secure attachment of a parent and child, we did studies, which now are in their 40th year, where you can show that when you have this early attuned relationship, you actually have more resilience, you have more flexibility, you're actually healthier in so many psychological ways. And mindfulness does the same thing. So for me, as an attachment researcher, when I first got introduced to John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction work, to me, it was a relationship you were developing with your inner life. And then the question was, what is actually shared in your inner life and in your interpersonal life? What is the common ground? So from a scientific point of view, you'd want to ask the question, if I'm looking for a mechanism that I could study, what would be the shared essence? So that's what I'm going to show you on some of these slides. And it relates to these basic questions. If the mind is happening right now, how many of you would say you have a mind? Raise your hand. So it's about half. That's so it's actually the same half that people said they meditate. That's interesting. Because when you do a lot of the external stuff, like on your phone a lot, sometimes don't you feel mindless? Yeah. Right. So there's something about having a mind that's very interesting. So we have a mind. So if I said to you, well, what is the mind? This would be along, in our Mindset Institute, this is the kind of thing we always talk about, but you could spend a year on that first question, right? What is the mind? And I'm not going to get into that now, but you'll see in just a moment that if you don't ask that question and have the courage to ask the question, knowing that certain fields, in fact, most fields, in fact, all fields, don't answer that question. Amazing. I'm a psychiatrist. Zero definition of the mind. Anishi's a psychologist. There is no definition of the mind. There are descriptions, philosophy of mind. Not only are there no definitions of the mind, but philosophers of mind will tell you you are not supposed to define the mind because it'll limit your understanding if you say what it is. So, if as a psychiatrist I treat people who are suffering, that's my job, to bring people into the setting of a clinic or an office, find out where their suffering is, try to figure out what the suffering is from, and try to do whatever I can to reduce the suffering. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm a physician, and so that's what I'm trained to do. I once had a meeting actually at Esalen. We met for a week to figure out what should we do from a scientific point of view about the new human direction. I think the University of Miami's UMindfulness would be a great example of how to take the reins of that and say, let's change culture in a positive way. And at this meeting, there were all these scientists, and at the end of the meeting, a bunch of us who were clinicians said, let's go out and take these ideas and go help the world. And the scientists jumped up and said, you're not going to do that. And we said, what? And they said, we're scientists. We only study things. We don't try to change them. I said, wow. I'm a physician, and I'm trained to use science to change people's lives. So luckily at a center where you're trying to bring mindfulness, and you are intentionally trying to create a way to bring a reduction of suffering. So this question of what is a healthy mind becomes an important one as a clinician, right? But if you haven't said what the mind is, how can you say what a healthy mind is? It's very hard to do. The next thing is, how can you cultivate a healthy mind and a healthy world? So it's always fascinating to me when you see places that are really trying to do this that aren't defining things. And the cool thing about a mindfulness center is you can go deeply into some of the mechanisms and then see how to reduce the suffering that's there. So that's what we're going to look at right now. So here's one way of talking about the mind that has 4 facets that most people would agree upon. The first 3, subjective experience. Right now, as you're sitting there, or if you're in the Facebook world and you're in virtual land and you're standing there, how many of you would say you have a felt texture to being alive in this moment? Anyone have that? Raise your hand. Now it's about 1/10 of people. Okay, so this is, I want to make sure we're all on board with this. So what I mean by that is, at this very moment, if you, in awareness, try to be aware of the feeling of being alive. How many of you feel you're alive? Okay, so that's everybody. Now that feeling of being alive is sometimes called subjective experience. The other word for it is first-person experience. And that term is somewhat synonymous, and some people like one term, some people like the other. I tend to use subjective experience because in being an attachment researcher, I feel there's a subjectivity in the betweenness, so I wouldn't put it in one person. And I work with a group of systems scientists, and we study the feeling in a room when there's trust. So we would say there's a subjective feeling in the room, and we wouldn't use the word first person because it wouldn't make sense, because it's like 20 people in a room. Where is the first person? So we would use a subjective feeling. Anyway, other people don't like it because subjective implies, as a connotation, it's not as important. Well, actually, if you look at research across the board, the number one important thing in your life is your subjective experience. If you've got a ton of money and a ton of houses and a ton of stuff, and subjectively you're depressed and feel like life isn't worth living and you want to kill yourself, even though that's your subjective experience, it's really important. In fact, it's the number one important thing. If you look at a relationship, relationships where subjective experience is not shared are relationships with huge amounts of suffering. And relationships are sharing subjective experience. What are you feeling today, Mishi? Mishi says, I'm feeling X, Y, Z. And I go, tell me more about X, tell me more about Y, tell me more about Z. And now Mishi's subjective experience is in me. And she can see I really care about it. And now I'm trying to reflect in my understanding of X, Y, and Z. And now we have a close relationship. That's basically it. Shared subjective experience. I worked on a suicide prevention service in college. They taught us the way you connect with someone is with the feeling of sharing their subjective experience. So at a minimum, if you notice that term subjective experience, there's really no other place to put it except under the word mind. And as a starting point, it's why mind is not the same as the brain. Because if someone were on a suicide call and they said, oh, I'm thinking of killing myself, there's no reason for living, and I go, you know, I think your orbital frontal cortex has got a decreased connection to your amygdala and probably a lot of your brain. Wouldn't matter if I identified their brain firing patterns, even if subjective experience were only dependent on brain firing patterns. It's not the same. But it's also dependent on a lot more things, including our sense of connection and belonging to other people. How do you know you're having a subjective experience? Because of this thing called consciousness. Right? So this becomes really, really important for understanding mindfulness training. Because ultimately what we're talking about is becoming aware of subjective experience. If subjective experience is the most important thing in human life, which I think it is, from research, I'm saying, from clinical experience, from just being a human, and the way you know you have subjective experience is you're aware, well then, or conscious, I'm using those synonymously, then consciousness becomes incredibly important. And so to have a center like UMindfulness is really all about a center of awareness, of consciousness. And consciousness is the gateway for knowing the most important thing in human life. And when you have a bunch of apps or different things in the digital world that don't get you in touch with your subjective experience, you may think you're connected and think you have all these friends, but actually it is so superficial, there's nothing about subjective experience that's really being joined. And as Sherry Turkle calls it, it's being alone together. And we see, and it doesn't mean it's the cause, but as the digital world has gotten more and more active, anxiety, depression, isolation, and suicide has gone up, not only in youth, but in adults as well. Well, the mind also includes this thing called information processing, which happens, yes, in your brain, but it's happening also in your heart. There's a neural network around your heart. It happens in your intestines. It also happens in your phone. It happens in a book. It happens in a computer. So information processing is not limited to your brain. And yet it's what the mind is. And information processing doesn't have to be an awareness. In fact, most of it is not an awareness. So that's another aspect of mind. And the final thing, self-organization, I'll just say very briefly that if we go to this drawing and say, how does this stuff of your subjective experience in consciousness and even information processing flow through you? It flows through in two fundamental ways, and one is like a hose. Like if I go, how many of you heard that? So that was like a hose just going through you. But if I say Miami Beach, then it's more like the constructor. Miami Beach is information. It's, again, energy, in this case, air molecules moving, but this time it has a symbolic value. So sometimes energy is just energy, blah, 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 and sometimes it's symbolic. Miami Beach. Right now you can imagine the beach, but the phrase Miami Beach is just a set of words. Okay, so we have a conduit and constructor, and this was looking at the mind as energy and information flow. And on the next slide, you can see why we can think of our first question, what's within and between, and the possible answer is energy and information flow. Now I'm saying all that because what we're about to get to, if we didn't do all this, would make zero sense. So look at this triangle. This triangle tells us that energy and information flows where? Where is it flowing in your life? You tell me. Like right now, this body is going to come down and get some water to flow into my mouth. Where is energy and information flowing in your life right now? It's going through your whole body, exactly. So let's start with a reference point of the skin. You have skin that encases the body you were born into, and one location of this energy and information flow is in your body. We're going to call that the embodied brain, because the brain is an important part of it, but it is the whole body, exactly. So the first spatial referent is the body, the embodied brain. Where else is it flowing right now, in this room right now, or for those of you out there in virtual land, where is it flowing?
To seeing, to hearing.
It's in the in-between. We can do it by seeing, by hearing, and all these ways we're passing energy from one body to another body, either in this case through the air, you can see me, also with sound or light. We can be touching, you can be smelling, tasting, all ways. In this way, it's mostly sound and light, through light going through this digital thing and sound. So there's a betweenness to energy and information flow. What we're studying, Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer, Menda Bol and myself, what we're studying is something called generative social fields. So we're trying to study why some classrooms promote incredible compassion and connection, collaboration and creativity, and others don't. And we think it has everything to do with the field that's created. So we're actually studying the betweenness of energy and information flow. Now I'm saying all that because where does the mind fit into that then? So mind could be interpretation, and where does that happen? It could happen in consciousness. Okay, so consciousness could be something about interpretation. Excellent. Now, what kind of system is this? Well, if you're a scientist, like I'm trained to be, and Abishi is, you're always asking questions like, how does that happen? Why does that happen? How can I study that? How can I know the mechanisms of something? So what I'm about to do is go with you into the science of mindfulness by looking at the science of mind. Everybody with me on that? This is why we're going through these details. Because for me to not do that feels very frustrating. And for me to help my patients back before I even knew there was a term called mindfulness, this was a line of reasoning in the early 1990s that led to this field called interpersonal neurobiology. And when you ask this question, what is that system? What kind of system is that? What you want to do is go look at system science. System science, and Danny will probably understand this as an engineer, but system science is a mathematical science. It's part of probability theory that looks at systems. And this system has three characteristics. It is open to influences from outside of itself. It's capable of being chaotic, this energy information flow. And it has this very important characteristic called nonlinearity. That is, if a small thing happens, it leads to a large and difficult to predict result. So it's open, chaos capable, and nonlinear. And if you have all three characteristics in mathematics, you are called a complex system. And I'm going through that very quick analysis to say that in our universe, in this reality we live in, every complex system has something called emergent phenomena. That is, the interaction of the elements of the system give rise to something. That's what emerge means. So you don't have to have a conductor, you don't have to have somebody creating it. It's an emergent property, like the shape of clouds, for example. Clouds are a complex system of water molecules and air molecules, and they have various emergent properties. One of those emergent phenomena is called self-organization. And when I read about this in 1992, it blew my mind. Not that I had a definition of the mind at that point, but it blew my mind wide open, because what it said was that complex systems naturally organize their own unfolding. And it turns out that you could then ask the question, what happens when a complex system is not optimizing its unfolding? And let me show you this. When it optimizes that flow, it's not showing up on this slide, let me show you 1 second. Let me just tell you what this is. When it optimizes the flow, it has 5 characteristics that for some reason on this slide are not coming out. I don't know why, but let me just tell you what it is. It spells the word faces. Well, it doesn't spell it. I'm an acronym addict, so I spelled it this way when I rearranged it and renamed it. It's flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. So let's say that really simply, a complex system which is optimizing self-organization has a faces flow. It's flexible, adaptive, coherent, means resilient over time, energized, and stable. When it's not in this flow, it goes to one of 2 states. It goes into the chaos, where things are completely unpredictable, random, or it goes to rigidity, completely predictable, unchanging. So this optimal flow in the middle is like a river. Picture a river. The faces flow is flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. When I read that, I thought, that's the best definition of mental health I've ever seen. In fact, it was the only definition of mental health I'd ever seen, although it was from math. And you can say, well, how do you get that? How do you get that? And it turns out this is how you get it. Math says that when you differentiate aspects of the system and then link them, you get a faces flow. That's it. There's no name in math for that, so I named it integration. So integration we're defining as the linkage of differentiated parts. Okay? All that being said, this, I think, is the basis of health. So in the 90s, what the hypothesis was that health comes from integration. Where? In your brain. Where? In your brain, its communication with other systems in the body. Where? With your body and its connection with other people. With your body, its connection to many people. With your body and its connection with nature. You could look at integration across all kinds of interconnectivity. And what do we know now? If you look at something called the connectome studies, where you're looking at the massively interconnected networks of the brain, the best predictor of health and happiness as a neural correlate is how interconnected your connectome is. Smith et al., 2015. If you look at studies of psychiatric disorders, so far, and I had 16 interns work with me to look at all this most recent data, every research study ever done on anyone with a psychiatric disorder has impaired integration in the brain. And every psychiatric disorder has either chaos, rigidity, or both in their symptom profile. It's absolutely startling. This hypothesis from 25 years ago has a lot of data now to support it. So back then, the idea was, well, if the integration is the basis of health, and consciousness is needed for change, like when you're a parent, you want your kid to be conscious, or a teacher, you want the students to be conscious, or if you're doing psychotherapy, you want your patient to be conscious. I mean, all these things. So these are 2 ideas. Consilience is when you have independent things overlap in their fundamental principles. So the first is integration is health. The second is Consciousness is needed for change. So here's what happened in the office was, I thought, what if you combine those two and integrated consciousness? Everybody with me so far? Now you know where the integration thing comes from. Any questions so far? Because this is the ground that we need to even go into what we're about to do. So this is where the idea came up of integrating consciousness. So I have this table in my office, which has like this, some of you have seen it, you know, it has this glass center and a wooden rim. And so I would bring my patients off the couch or the table, and I said, let's integrate consciousness. They go, what are you talking about? I said, well, imagine that consciousness has two aspects to it. The knowing of consciousness, you know, being aware. Like if I say, hello, how many of you know I said hello? Raise your hand really high. Okay? So that experience you just had the knowing, but then what was the known of what just happened? Hello. You have the hello, the object of awareness, and you have the knowing of awareness. Two very different things. So we put in the hub of this table, but no one wanted to call it the table of awareness, so we called it the wheel of awareness. We put in the hub the knowing, you put on the rim all the knowns, and you tell me, somebody throw out, what's a known you can have? You can have the color of the sky. What else? And a feeling of something. Yes, what else?
Sound.
And sounds, exactly. So you could map it out. Here's the table that my daughter Dan Siegel drew for the book Aware. So we're putting the knowing in the center of that table, that wheel. The rim of the knowns, and that spoke is a spoke of attention. And then you can see that for the first 5 senses on the first segment, you have hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and smelling, right? You move the spoke over after you do those one by one, and then you do bodily sensations. Name a bodily sensation.
Tightness.
Feeling in your muscles, right? Tightness, right? What's another feeling?
Numbness.
Hunger.
What's that?
Numbness.
Numbness, so lack of a feeling, okay?
Hunger.
What's that?
Hunger.
You could have a feeling of hunger in your intestines.
Temperature.
And well, temperature might be more external, yeah, but yeah. Because this is different from touch. So things like your heart or your respiratory system or your intestines, your genitals, your muscles, your bones, that's called interoception. Okay, and then you move the spoke over again. Now what would be an example of a mental activity you might become aware of? So you could have an emotion like stress, you could have a thought, right? What else?
Belief system.
And a belief system, exactly. Okay, so those are mental activities. And then we move the spoke over one more time, and the 8th sense, and we're ordering these around, so first 5, in science we call interoception of the body, 6th sense, so then we can name mental activities the 7th sense. The 8th sense is our sense of interconnection with other people on the planet. You know when you feel close to someone, like someone you're sitting close to maybe, you have a feeling of connection, so people open awareness to that. Anyway, people would do this, and strangely, my patients who had anxiety, the anxiety would dissolve. Mild to moderate depression, they would get better. People dealing with trauma, put in the setting of trauma work, this was incredibly helpful. People who had medical illnesses, they found it very helpful. And I'll give you 3 examples right now. We're going to ask, why did this help them? Let's start with Joey. Joey is a 5-year-old boy. He gets kicked out of one kindergarten for beating up a kid on the yard. He gets transferred to another school. Ms. Smith teaches all of her kids, 5-year-olds, the wheel of awareness as a drawing. And she writes me an email that on the 2nd day, Joey, no, let's call him Billy. Billy is, because this is how it is in the book. So Billy is, comes to her and says, during break, Ms. Smith, you've got to give me a break. I'm out on the yard. Joey took my blocks. I'm about to hit him. I'm lost on my rim. I got to get back to my hub. Right? 5 years old, not a meditation, but a drawing practice, which could be considered a kind of meditation. Okay, that's case number 1, is Billy. Case number 2, let me think of the best one to use for you. Let's talk about Jonathan. Jonathan came with cycling mood issues, and he was struggling. It looked like he had bipolar disorder. He was 16, and I sent him to another board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist, made the same diagnosis, so we were going to start on medications. The parents refused, So we sent him to a third board-certified child mental psychiatrist, third diagnosis, same diagnosis. Parents still refused for very reasonable medical reasons. So I said, look, I don't know if this is going to work, but because of neuroplasticity, it could be that how you focus attention might change the structure of the brain in integrative ways. Let's try to do this wheel practice and see if you integrate consciousness, maybe you could integrate the brain. Around the same time, Hillary Bloomberg at Yale came out with studies showing that in bipolar disorder, people have impaired integration of the brain, like in all the different studies. In this case, for those who want to know, from the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex down to the amygdala, there's insufficient inhibitory fibers. So the bottom line is the deeper emotional structures were out of control. And during the adolescent remodeling period, this was a very risky time for Jonathan, because the more stress he would have, the more cortisol he would have, the more removal of these inhibitory fibers he'd probably get, the more out of control he would get. So if we could give him an intervention that could actually change the structure of his brain, then the future of his life might be different. Not whether or not he used medication, that was the issue, but that we could grow fibers that were insufficient because of just genetic reasons. He did the practice very diligently, and in fact, he was able to stabilize his mood. Why would a wheel practice help someone with mood swings stabilize that? And that's just not in this one study. Now, there are a number of studies going on at Stanford, some at UCLA by David Miklovich. At Stanford, it's Kiki Chan are doing these studies to look at mindfulness interventions, because this might be considered a mindfulness intervention, even though it's an integration of consciousness practice. Why would that be helpful? Third case, very briefly, is a mom who had 3 kids below 5, was losing her mind, getting really agitated a lot, really, really upset. She had some issues, very difficult childhood experiences herself. Doing the wheel practice was extremely helpful for her, so when she would feel her rage coming up, just like Billy was going to punch Joey on the yard, she could sense these elements on the rim and come back to her hub. And just like the quote that everyone attributes to Viktor Frankl, which is fine, even though he may not have said it, there's a space between impulse and action, and in that space is the capacity for choice and change and growth. That's what the hub is. It's that space. So what is that? Even if there is this wheel practice, and now I've done this with about 40,000 people in person, but with the first 10,000 in workshops, I did it systematically, recorded the results when people would say what was going on. And Amishi and I are talking about those results. You're going to hear about them a little bit now. It's just really, really fascinating. By good fortune, this attempt to integrate consciousness has what are called 3 pillars of mind practice built into one practice. Those 3 pillars these are what people study when they study standard contemplative-derived meditations, which this is not. But when you study standard things, for example, from Buddhist practice, you study 3 components. One is focused attention training. The second pillar is open awareness, where you just open awareness and don't try to focus on anything particular, just rest in awareness itself. And the third is developing loving kindness, which I call kind intention. Those 3 pillars, the first 2 segments are focused attention. The third is actually open awareness. You even, here, as I'll show you in a second, you bend the spoke around and explore the hub itself. And we'll be doing that tomorrow. For those of you who can't go tomorrow, I'm going to do a 3-day intensive on this. If you want to come to the Redwoods in Northern California next weekend, there are lots of opportunities. It's a great place to go. Although you're having nice weather here, although people tell me it's cold in Miami. I'm like out in my shorts, everyone's in their sweaters, and I'm going, something isn't right here. I'm usually the one cold. I came to the one place in the country which is warmer than Los Angeles. It was awesome. So, okay, so the hub is something you explore. So what is actually going on here? Well, you might say, Dan, you already said it. This is energy flow. This is the mind. This is something going on in the mind, isn't it? Right? So what's going on? Why would these people get better? Just talking about these 3.
Integration.
Let's name the mom, Mona, the boy with bipolar disorder, Jonathan, and the first boy, Billy.
Paying attention.
So something about paying attention, and what is attention?
Awareness.
Attention is awareness? Well, actually, that's a really good point. So Attention is considered the focus of energy and information flow, and some of it is not in awareness. It's called non-focal attention. And you have the world's expert on attention training right here, Mishi Jha, or one of the world's experts. Anyway, and then you have attention exactly with awareness called focal attention. So focal attention is what that spoke would be, and that will be how you drive energy and information flow into awareness. For sure, like if I say right now, be aware of your left big toe. Now your toe was always there, but you probably weren't having it in awareness, and now you do. So relationally, I was able to focus your attention. So sometimes attention is driven by something outside of you, we call you. Sometimes it's driven by you. There's all sorts of ways of talking about this directing of energy and information flow into awareness or not. So, but what exactly is it if it's related to energy? So, yes?
I think they become aware of the fact that they can change.
Beautiful. So there's this kind of empowerment. Exactly. This is one of the most beautiful things about mindfulness, is that it actually is an empowering thing. If you hear the list I'm about to tell you, you'll really know you're right. Empowerment is, yes, I can realize I can change, but I want to make sure I mention 5 things to you that, some researchers would say absolutely, some would say we need more studies. It's always safe in research to say, we need more studies to absolutely say that, so I'm going to say that ahead of time. We need more studies to say that, but having passed this by many of the scientists who did those studies, I feel pretty confident about this list. Number 1, it reduces stress. That's awesome. Cortisol levels decrease. Number 2, it improves the immune system. That's pretty cool. Number 3, it actually optimizes your cardiovascular system by lowering blood pressure, lowering heart rate, and improving cholesterol levels. It also makes the heart communicate with the head in a better way. Number 4, it changes the epigenetic controls of regions of your genome that help reduce inflammation. So inflammation is reduced by changing the way genes are expressed, on with what you do with your mind, with these 3-pillar trainings. And number 5, you actually optimize the level of an enzyme called telomerase that maintains and repairs the ends of your chromosomes so your cells are healthier and live longer. And as Alyssa Epel, who is one of the leading researchers on aging, with her colleague Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for this, showed presence. The way you're in awareness, in an open way, receptive to what's going on as it's going on, that's called presence. Presence, what you do with your mind, is one of the most robust predictors of how you optimize telomerase levels. So that's number 5. I lied to you. I'm going to actually tell you 6 things. The 6th thing you do is you make your brain more integrated. And there's all sorts of ways of doing it. Your hippocampus grows, your corpus callosum grows, areas of your prefrontal cortex grow, and your connectome becomes more interconnected. And an integrated brain means a resilient person. So, absolutely, you're empowered to create health. And your relationships are improved. So you think about a center of mindfulness here at the university, what would it do? It would actually empower people to become more insightful and healthier in their bodies and more connected and compassionate to other people. Why wouldn't you support something like that? I mean, it actually would only make sense for all of us to actually collectively try to do something like that. So for me, as a physician, a university center on mindfulness, which we have at UCLA, is exactly the way to go here at the University of Miami. It's what we need to bring academia together with community, together with the larger world. And you actually have, Scott Rogers and Mishi Jha here to lead the way in powerful, powerful ways. So that's a fantastic thing. As a scientist, I want to ask the question to you again. So what's really going on? So I'm going to take you on a quick journey. I'm going to just check my watch. Yes? Yes. So the knowing, if I say hello to you and you know I said hello, that's in the hub. That's awareness.
Right.
If I say hello to you, the known would be, in terms of sound, would be initially that part of the first 5 senses you're hearing. Or if it were our relationship and I were like a neighbor I have, and I shouldn't say this publicly. Never mind. Anyway, I'll talk about the nice neighbor. The neighbor who always says hello to me would be a part of a relationship, so that would be a part of a mental experience in my memory of my neighbor, right?
But I mean, on this wheel,
That would be the rim.
if the knowing and the known
Yeah.
become integrated,
Yeah.
that
Yeah, so because you're aware of those things, then you put a spoke over there, and actually we'll see what integration would look like in just a moment. Exactly, but that's the kind of question you want to ask. What does an integrated wheel really look like? Like I do the wheel practice pretty much every day, and people who do it on a regular basis, there's this kind of energy that's given, and just to give you, let me see if I have it over here. Yeah, so here's what people from the 10,000 person survey show. These are basically people who came to workshops, did the wheel of awareness practice, sometimes for a day, sometimes for 3 days, like we're doing next week at 1440. And those who took the microphone, this is what they reported. So this is basically just like a pilot survey. It's not like a systematic study of how did they do over the next 25 years. No, it's just how did they experience the wheel. And this is amazing. The amazing parts of it is no matter what country I did this in, the reports were incredibly similar. So sometimes I have students come with me to different workshops, and they're like amazed that what people, when they take the microphone, say are like identical things. And I've recorded all these, so I have all the recordings. So you can hear that. That's amazing. It doesn't matter if they've never meditated before, if they run monasteries. It doesn't matter. And here's some things they say, and this is what we're going to focus on for this, is not only do they feel like their minds get more, and their faces flow, which is fascinating, that you could use attention around the wheel to cultivate an integration of consciousness, and at that moment you start reducing chaos and rigidity, and you feel this energy in your life. That's kind of amazing, and this is why it's kind of easy to try to do it, because you actually feel really good after you do it. But when people explore the hub, amazingly, this is what they say, no matter what language it's in, culture I'm in, country, continent, doesn't matter. This is what they say. In the hub, and I want you to address this one question before we close in about 15 minutes. What is consciousness? What does it really mean to train people to be more mindful, to be more present? What does that mean? Why is that a hope for us reducing violence in the world? Why is that a hope for actually making people healthier and more collaborative with each other? Why are so many major corporations, like one here in Florida that's having me go to Daytona in 2 days, why are they trying to teach their employees to have what a university mindfulness center could be a leader in doing? Why would mindfulness be such a rage these days? What actually is that kind of open consciousness? So that's what we're going to address right now. So in the hub, we have an opportunity to study the subjective experience of consciousness in its pure form. Why do I say it like that? Because when you look at this incredibly simple visual image, what we've done is we've separated the knowing of consciousness, that is awareness, being aware, from that which you're aware of. Systematically, constantly differentiating hub from rim, going to the different elements of the rim. So you're differentiating rim elements from each other and differentiating all of that known from the knowing. Now, once you do that, you then can look at these statements. I'm going to ask you to think about what this might be. This is now science thinking, and it's just being a curious human. Why, when people bend the spoke around and aim attention into the hub of knowing, or for some people, they don't like to bend it, they like the visual image of retracting the spoke. Some people don't like to retract it, they like to have it, so here's bending it, here's retracting it, here's just leaving it in the hub, and other people like it no spoke. And you can try all those different things. And they feel a little differently, but whatever works for you. Why is it when you do one of those variations, people say, I felt clarity that I've never felt before, joy, empty yet full? Why do people say that? Expansive, infinite, eternity, God, love, peace. sense of belonging as a fundamental part of everything, the whole, connected to others, the world, and the universe. Time disappeared. I felt eternity. I felt infinity. What is going on? So as I was doing these workshops and collecting this data and just wondering about it, I surveyed as much as I could the brain science. And Amishi, maybe you can come up here, we can do this together, but I couldn't find anything in the brain science that would correlate with those things. But maybe we can do a fun discussion about it. So I happened to be teaching at a conference where they asked me to be a member of the faculty for 150 physicists and mathematicians, looking at the connection of science to spirituality. And since most of these were physicists, I kept on asking them, since these were the experts in energy, what is energy? What is energy? And I'll never forget what they said in various ways, and I talked to lots of different people. They said this. Remember, we said that the mind might be an emergent property of energy? Everybody remember that? This is why we had all that beginning. Here's what they said. Energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. And I said, what? And I said, yeah. Energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. That's what it is. It comes in lots of different forms. Electrical energy, we can study that in the brain. Chemical energy, we can study that in the brain. You know, but basically, the word energy refers to an experience we have in reality of the movement from possibility to actuality. So I asked them more and more about it. I was like either a nudnik or a kid in a candy store. I don't know what they thought of me, but anyway, I didn't really care too much. But you could graph it out like this, is how I graphed it. And this corresponds to a physics view of energy as the movement from possibility to actuality. So picture this. Right now I'm thinking of a word. Let's say you and I share 1 million words, right? What's your chance of knowing of all the possible words, right? So the movement from possibility to actuality. There's all the possibilities now that are 1 million, just to give you a graspable number. What's your chance of knowing the one word I'm thinking of? 1 in 1 million. So Maddie draws that out as an A. You see that 1 in 1 million. And we make a graph where the up and down axis of this little diagram is called the y-axis. It goes from 100% at the top, when we were going to say the word, to all the way at the bottom. It's not quite 0, because 1 out of 1 million isn't exactly 0. So you may hear me say 0, but if this is say, no, near 0. So you always have to say near 0. Anyway, the maximal possibilities are there at the bottom. But once I say ocean, what just happened? Just like that. What just happened? There's another one. Possibility went to actuality. And now, what's your chance of knowing that I said ocean after I said ocean? 100%. Everybody with me? See how that works? And so you can have this, if you were fly on the wall or a Martian, you would say, oh, energy just was flowing. Everybody with me? We went from possibility to actuality. Now, you can have something start at, let's say, 1 out of 10,000, if there are only words with an O, if there are 10,000, and then I go up to there. Or, oops, let's say you're going to go to, well, you can have all these different things that you'll see in a moment. So let me show you how this looks. If we make this diagram three-dimensional, so not just time going left and right on the x-axis, but now the z-axis goes in and out of the plane of the slide. Let's just call that diversity, the number of different things happening at one moment. Then you can see that the maximal possibilities are a plane. And we're just going to name that the plane of possibility. Everyone see that? Okay. Now this graph, and I've shown this to a lot of physicists and mathematicians, this graph is completely consistent with what quantum physicists like Arthur Zions affectionately call the sea of potential, and more specifically they call it the quantum vacuum. The quantum vacuum is a mathematical space Danny and I had lunch this morning, and this is my morning, your afternoon. This is a mathematical view of what we're talking about the movement from possibility to actuality. In physics terms, you go from the quantum vacuum, the sea of potential, what we're calling in the graph the plane of possibility, and you choose among those, and what rises up from that vast plane of possibility is an actuality. Or you move to, as you'll see in a moment, you move to a plateau, which would be a more limited thing. Like, let's say there are 5 oceans in the world. Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, etc. What's your chance of knowing which ocean I'm going to say? 1 out of 5. So it would be higher. So you can see that plateau there? That plateau would be a restricted number of peaks. That would be the actualities that could arise. Let's say I was in a depressed mood. Okay? Let's say I'm your close friend and I'm depressed. Then what depression, I think, is the body, the brain, the relational world, everything has entered a very high and restricted plateau of deflation and being disempowered and feeling isolated. And the only peaks that arise is, I'm no good, I've never been good, things are hopeless, I may as well kill myself. And I have a very restricted sense of depressive plateau peaks that arise. Does that make sense? So the way we would graph that out is like this. That a thought would be a peak. Thinking would be just beneath the peak, a sub-peak value. An emotion would be a peak. Emoting would be a sub-peak value. A memory would be a peak. Remembering would be a sub-peak value. And then a state of mind or intention or mood would be a plateau. Everybody with me on this? And Amishi and I have had so much fun talking about this because you probably could map this out on brain dynamics. Even if you want to stick with the brain. But I'm not sure you do. As a relational scientist, you can map this out on a relational field. When a teacher goes in and says, you better get this right or wrong, and you better get it that way, or you're going to be in really deep trouble, son. You know, you can feel in the room, I've created this plateau, whereas other teachers create a spaciousness down in that plane of possibilities where a student realizes they can have the courage to make a mistake. They can be creative. They can be collaborative. You feel the difference? Right? And I see this in attachment all the time. I can map the entire attachment world out on this graph. So, if elements that are on the rim are like peaks and maybe plateaus, where is the hub correlating with on this graph? The plane of possibility. So tell me, as you look at this graph, what you feel the subjective experience, the felt texture of lived life, what would it feel like to drop into the plane of possibility? Spacious. It's open. It's a quality of consciousness, exactly. Spacious, open, the quality of consciousness. Tell me more. What else comes to your mind about that?
Presence.
Presence. That's where presence comes from. Tell me more.
Joy.
What's that?
Joy.
And joy. You'd have this incredible feeling of joy. And amazingly, people describe love. Now, I have a dear friend, John O'Donoghue, who passed away. He had been an Irish Catholic priest. I work with all sorts of religious leaders, rabbis, and all sorts of every religion you can imagine. But anyway, I was teaching in Ireland in honor of John's life. It was 10 years since his passing. So I was very nervous about this, but I showed this graph at a memorial lecture for him, a 2-day lecture. They usually give 16-hour lectures. And, and I showed this graph, and I said, there were a lot of priests in the room. So I said, I don't insult anyone, but this is the generator of diversity. And those of you who know I'm an acronym addict could take that and turn that into an acronym.
Yeah.
So I said to the Catholic priests in the room, I said, I hope that wasn't offensive. They go, Danny, that was not offensive. I can't do the Irish word. But they said, Danny, that was not offensive at all. That was actually exactly how we experienced God. It was amazing. So the bridging of science and spirituality has been an incredible conversation with this graph. because the generator of diversity is the plane of possibility. And amazingly, I had some friends who were studying with the Dalai Lama, and he was talking about emptiness and every night. That's why we're having dinner, and I said, I don't get this emptiness thing. It's really more like fullness of possibility, but the absence of form. It's the formless source of all form. And they go, were you at the lecture? I go, no, what did he say? And he goes, that's exactly what he said. I said, well, tell me more. He said it was a mistranslation, the Buddhist notion of emptiness. It's emptiness of form and presence of possibility. I said, you're kidding me. They said, no, that's the wording he used. So what's so interesting about this is the wheel of awareness, as simple as it is, distinguishing the knowing from the known, with the survey, the 10,000 person survey, when you hear what people say. And we have actually a recording. You can actually listen to one particular workshop. And, people just get up and talk on the microphone. You can hear them say these things. When you go through it yourself and experience it yourself, and you get in touch with, let me come back to it, so you can see where we are, get back to that. What would it be like if every day, every morning, you did a practice? And the reason my mindfulness colleagues call this a mindfulness practice is because it has many of the features of, because it has the 3 pillars and all this other stuff. It wasn't designed to be that way, but I'm happy that they want to call it a mindfulness practice. Beautiful, that's great. Bless you. It's an integration of consciousness practice, which, by the way, I think the other mindfulness practices may be too. They're integrating consciousness. So look at this. Imagine if you could do a practice every day, building on the notion that where attention goes, neural firing flows, and neural connection grows. So you can take a state that you create intentionally with a mindfulness practice, and with practice, create a trait in your life. That's the whole notion of practice. A state becomes a trait. So imagine if you, let's say, want to do this practice, you go to our website for free. We've had over 1 million people stream this. You just give it away. Our accountant thinks we're insane, but we just want to share it with everybody. So people go there, and you can go there. It's drdansiegel.com. You can go to the resources tab, go to the wheel of awareness. Start slow. If you've never done meditation, do some breath practice first, but you can start with the beginning wheel, the middle wheel, then the more advanced wheel. Imagine if you could create a regular practice in your life where in various ways, maybe it's just a little glimpse, maybe it's a long setting, where you could feel this clarity, joy, and look at that phrase, empty yet full. Take a look at that phrase now. And from a deep scientific proposal, can you see where that subjective feeling comes from? It's empty of form and full of possibility. Now, the last thing I want to say is, you may say, well, this doesn't quite make sense. If it's so simple, why isn't everyone doing it? Well, here's just something to think about. Pure hub experience is pure uncertainty. And we are trained in our life from the time we're kids, with our parents usually, certainly out in our classroom, to know the answer. We want to be certain. What's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? I want to know the right answer. I want to know the right answer. I want to get this right, that right. I got it. We're supposed to be certain about everything. To drop into the hub means dropping into uncertainty. Now, what is the synonym? A word that means the same thing as uncertainty.
Mystery.
Mystery, unknown, and freedom. So the amazing thing when you give people this graph, it's what's been so rewarding about the Aware book, because the Aware book goes through this. I wanted the Aware book to be really short, but then when I got to the graph part, it's about 100 pages to explain to you what I explained in 5 minutes. So I said to my editor, I want this a shorter book, please make it shorter. After she read it, said you can't cut out a word. So the book is what it is, but it takes you through, so it's very slowly walks you through it. But the idea here is imagine a practice where every day you can get this sense of belonging, to realize you're part of an interconnected whole, where whether you're talking about your relationship with your inner life, where your mind is, or your relationship with other people, where your mind is, or your relationship with the planet, where your mind is. Your mind is within and between. Of course it includes the brain. The brain is super important. And it includes your whole body. The body is really important. And it includes your one-on-one relationships. Those are really important. And your family relationships. Those are important. Networks of support. Those are important. And your relationship as a community. Those are really important. And your relationship with Earth. That's really important. So the beautiful moment we're at here as a human family is if we can actually define the mind as both within and between, and define a healthy life as one that's integrating within and between, then you can take UMindfulness, for example, as a center, get behind it and say, we want to make a more integrated world to make healthier lives for all of us. That is something that we can all do, and now understand some of the possible mechanisms underneath it, so that whether you're in a spiritual practice, or a clinical practice, or a science practice, tapping into that hub is actually tapping into this plane of possibility, so that what you can do is learn to live from that plane and develop a richer way of being present in life. And basically, the integration that arises from that presence, it's kindness and compassion. And that's the kind of world we all can create with one another. Thank you so much for your attention. Yeah, and Amishi says if you want to stay, we have time for questions. Is that right? And we have a microphone, and so as some people say, questions end with a question mark. And if you also want to share a joke, that's fine.
Hello, my name is Christina.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation and bringing together science and spirituality and placing it in context and clarity for people to have more access to these kinds of information, make it less woo-woo. I'm a systemic biologist, evolutionary biologist, and one of the things that I find really interesting is that physics is such a great language, mathematics is such a great language to understand energy and how the mind works. But, and this is an open question, what about biology? Because I know that in my colleagues, we get stuck.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see what your experience has been and your opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for those comments and the question. You know, I'm trained as a biologist. I'm a biochemist by training. And so I was always fascinated when I was learning to, we were studying why salmon can go from being hatched in fresh water to surviving into salt water. And we would look for the enzyme that allowed them to do it, and found it and everything like that when I was an undergraduate. It was very exciting, you know, and I loved enzymology, you know, it was so cool. And I was very interested in larger systems, you know, how the plasma could change its density when they went into the salt water and stuff like that. But at night, I was working on the suicide prevention service. And that's where they taught me that the way you connect with a suicidal person on a phone call and tune into them is as much a matter of life and death as the salmon having the right enzyme and the right density of their plasma. So I know this sounds weird, but I always, from that young age, I was an adolescent, obviously in college, you know, I was really fascinated with, as a biology trained person, like how does life embrace emotional communication and enzymatic catalysis, you know? And when I went to medical school, I thought it would be a place where that would happen, which it didn't happen at all. It's a reductionistic nightmare of a place. But because being human is more than being a bag of chemicals, you see. And this is where my training in biochemistry was very useful, because when they would act like we were just organs and all this kind of stuff, and by the second year when I was in the locker room and my colleagues, my peers, would say, oh, I saw a great liver today, and I said, excuse me, don't you mean you saw a person with a liver disease? And they said, oh, shut up, you're from California, aren't you? You know, and it was, you know, it was really sad. And when you see that 56% of postgraduate medical trainees are either seriously anxious, depressed, or thinking of killing themselves. 56%. The medical profession has got to get its act together. And mind is missing from medicine in every way you can imagine. So that's all, you're getting me all off on that. But in terms of the biology stuff, you know, these principles act across different levels of systems analysis. And so, absolutely, I think there's an opportunity to look at systems biology and to look not only at evolution, but to look at physiology and things like that. And the brain is a part of that. You know, when you look at the issues of allostasis and allostatic load, and look at the issue of both surviving and thriving, and Antonio Damasio, I did a whole thing about this just a couple months ago, you know, if you look at his book, The Strange Order of Things, by Antonio Damasio, I recommend that to you as a biologist. There really is a way of looking, even though, you know, and Antonio talked about, and I talked about this on the stage, he doesn't talk about energy information flow, he doesn't talk about integration at all. However, he was completely open to both those things. And so once you look at energy information flow, you can start looking at these mathematical principles of systems and start understanding how mental processes are biological processes. Relationships are biology. And like when adoptive parents say to me, oh, I'm just the adoptive parent, I'm not the biological parent, I said, no way. You're taking care of someone that is biology. You are the biological parent. You may not be the birth parent, but you are the biological parent. And just that, conceptualization of what happens, just to make sure we're all in the same boat about this. One way we understand information processing in the brain is that there's so much energy passing through our nervous system, including the brain in our head, that the brain has got to do three things. It has to make categories, then make concepts, and then make linguistic symbols, like biological parent. Oh my God, I'm not the biological parent. And then you feel so terrible. Well, you can undo those things. Just like I think one of the linguistic symbols that's going to kill us is a 4-letter word. Self. S-E-L-F. Self. Why do we take the linguistic symbol self and put it in the concept of an individual identity and then think that your self is defined by the bag of skin that encases you? But we do. And part of the next book Scott was talking about that I'm trying to figure out how to word this for us, and you'll see in the Wheel of Awareness practice, is that we have a word me and I that is killing us. And you say, well, so we're not going to just drop that and go to we, but there's a word that embraces both me and we. And what is it? We, exactly. And you'd be amazed in these workshops when people hear the word we, they go, what? I said, yeah, who you are. Who you are. Yourself is relationships and your body. And people start going around, kids in schools, I do this in schools, kids in schools start talking about was and we and stuff like that. And it's amazing if you take a linguistic symbol, go backwards, make it into a concept, and then go backwards, make it a category, and it liberates the brain from the prison that we socially construct for our own lives. I think one thing killing Earth is that humanity in contemporary cultures has created a category concept and linguistic symbol of self as separate. And you can trace this into a lot of the incredible destruction that human beings create, not only in the larger world, but in their individual lives. And when you deconstruct the self like that and expand it to a we, you're basically integrating it, because of course your body's important, knowing your life, knowing where you've come from, your attachments, all that stuff really important. Getting good sleep, exercising, eating well, all that stuff is a me. That's great. But we are also who we are. And that's a way that we can build on this. Yes. Is there another question or joke? Oh, thank you.
Quick question. Did you find anybody where this should not be done on? Or did you find any harm? Anybody report any problems with this?
Yeah, it's a great question, just because you don't have microbiologists. The question is, what about harm? Now, some of you may know the work of Willoughby Britton, who is investigating for all mindfulness practices what are some of the risks. And so she has her own perspective and experience with that. And I've talked to a lot of mindfulness teachers who have actually a very different take on it than her take, and so it'll be interesting to get them on a panel and have a conversation about that. And I'm going to actually do one of her trainings at UCLA, where we're bringing her the Mindful Awareness Research Center, actually bringing her to train us in some of these issues. So, Willie Britton's work, and I at Harvard, we were having a meeting and all this stuff, and she was giving her a summary of her work. Her concern is that some people do these practices and get very disoriented, they can get in altered states, they can't do that stuff, and anything that's powerful to make a change can be powerful to disrupt a system. And in general, in systems views, you can go from a system having one state of stability, and in order to create a different state, it has to go through a period of disorientation and disorganization. That's just natural for systems. That's what they do. So when I do a workshop, for example, and I've done this with now 40,000 people, but even with the 10,000 that we were doing the recordings, here's an example of one person where she did the wheel, And actually, was this the person who was at our one? No, it was the next week when Amisha and I just talked for a week together, but it was the following week. And she takes the microphone and she says, I just did the wheel and I'm dead. There's 150 people in the room. They just did that. And so and I'm up there as the facilitator, and I said, can you share with us, what it feels like to be dead? Because some of us haven't experienced that yet. Because I knew there were people believing in reincarnation, so I knew they had been dead. So I'm serious. You've got to be very open to all the different. So she said, well, and she goes on about being numb and being disconnected and basically being dissociated. Now I'm a clinician who actually specializes in dissociation, so I felt comfortable with that. And so I said, well, tell us more about this. And I got her grounded in her body and anchored to the feelings in her body, and we talked about some other things. This is in front of 150 people. And then she got to a certain point where she said, I guess if I had to summarize things at this point, now that I've done this work, she goes, when I got to the hub, I felt completely in pieces and at peace. So I said, can you hold it right there? And we're going to let other people share, and then we'll do a little discussion. So then other people shared, they had very, very different experiences than that, the other things I was saying. And then I did the graph discussion that we did here, and you could see the idea of being in pieces and at peace was that she had certain constructed plateaus. See the graph here? She had certain constructed plateaus that this mindfulness practice, this integration of consciousness practice, this reflective meditative practice, was rupturing her plateaus. And so she was falling into the plane. And these energy patterns had nowhere to go because she had been constructed a certain way. And so she was literally in pieces. But she was also in the plane, so she was at peace, because that's where peace comes from. Okay, so we did the whole discussion, not talking about her, just giving the general discussion of that. And now it was time to close the workshop session that morning. So I turned back to her and I said, can we come back to you and just check in with you? She's got this gigantic smile on her face. And I said, can you share with us where you're at? And she just takes her finger and she points to her smile. She says, I don't need to say any more than this. And she's like glowing, like there's this light around her. So through the whole week, this is like on the second day of the week-long conference, the whole week I checked in with her and her friends. They've never seen her look so happy before in their life. And she talked to me about it, and basically different notions of, her thought of what success was and how she had to do this and do that. And she was like in a certain field where she was making a lot of money and thought that was completely meaningless for her. And all that stuff was now deconstructed, not just by my talk, but where the whole conference was going. And so she was dropping out of that belief system that money makes you happy. And she had come to this workshop to find a different source of meaning. So of course she was getting disoriented and dissociated. She was literally disassociating her usual association. And in the setting of the group, she can move through that. Now, Lily B. Britton's point is that and Lily didn't hear any of this stuff, she wasn't there, but when people are isolated and alone, like doing this on an app, and not with the support of a good teacher or, with a community, maybe it's hard for them to drop into this place where actually more meaning can arise. And what I would say to that is, absolutely, as a therapist, I know that's true. If you're going to do really good work in therapy, it's not going to be fun. You're going to do some hard work, it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be scary, and you drop into that uncertainty where freedom rests. And so, yes, so there are negative things. Now, what generally other meditation teachers who run meditation centers have said, and I'll quote them, they say, if someone has a psychiatric disorder or serious trauma they're beginning to work on, they should not do a long-term silent retreat. We've had serious problems with people in that setting. But other than that, we haven't had any problems with anyone. So I'm giving you both views because we need to explore both views. And so does that help answer your question? Yeah, and what I would say if you're sitting in the audience going, I don't know which one I'm in, go slow. Just go slow, get a good teacher, find a community. It's why you need a center to support people's journeys to getting more present in life and being more connected. Good. Thank you so much.